Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Startup Sales. Really excited for this week's episode with David Priemer. He's the author of Sell the Way You Buy. Really interesting book. I just actually got a copy myself and have started reading it, so I'll let you guys know on that. But it's so far so good. He's the former VP sales, commercial sales for Salesforce, and he's now the founder of Cerebral Selling. It's a mouthful. Cerebral Selling. And I actually had a good long conversation with him last week, and he really knows his stuff. He's got a lot of information, and today we're going to be talking about messaging and how to get the best messaging across to your buyers. So stay tuned. We've got a lot to cover.
Startup Sales is a podcast about what it's really like to get a business off the ground. We talk with founders, CEOs, and sales VPs from the high-tech market. You'll learn how to build and scale a sales team. You'll also hear about the growth challenges and tough decisions from others who have had both successes and failures. And now, your host of the Startup Sales Podcast, Adam Springer.
David, thanks for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure, Adam. That was an awesome intro. One of the best I've seen. That's very impressive. No,
Thank you.
For having me.
Good thing for Fiverr.
Yeah, no kidding. Wow.
Yeah.
Gotta look into some of that myself now. My goodness.
Yeah. Great. So, David, what can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your history?
Oh my God. Well, where do you want to start? Well, back as a boy, growing up in Canada, I used to play a lot of hockey because that's what we do here. No, you know what?
Hey.
You know, yeah, you're gonna hear me say. I might say process or project, those kinds of things, so you'll know I'm Canadian. But no, everyone has a story around how they got into sales because no one tends to get into sales on purpose. We all have a journey, and we got here. It's not like we grew up as kids saying, hey, you know what I want to be when I grow up, or even taking it in school. So I was no different. I actually started my career as a research scientist over 20 years ago, and then got into sales at the turn of the dot-com boom, if you remember that, in kind of the 1999-2000 timeframe. Ended up joining a startup. I joined as a sales engineer. So kind of my background was technical. I was doing science and engineering, doing coding and so on. And so I joined a sales team, a startup. It was 20 people at the time as a sales engineer, and absolutely fell in love with sales. Kind of started to think of sales almost like a bit of an engineering problem. There's like rules and parameters. But yeah, we grew that company from 20 to 700 people and $100 million business. We IPO'd, we got acquired, and then over the course of those next 20 years, I just love sales. I ended up working at 3 more startups. 5 years at Salesforce before I started to do this. So that's the short history.
I think that's the history of like Mark Roberge has a very similar history, and coming from an engineering background and approaching sales in that more technical way and like measuring everything.
Oh yeah,
has a lot.
I'm a fan of Robert. I mean, he's an endorser of my book, and we're friends. We speak every now and then. He was a big help to me when I was building my third startup. This was like 2008, 2009, when he was at HubSpot, really cranking it there. And it was cool to see a lot of his insights end up in his book, The Sales Acceleration Formula, which I'm a huge fan of, because they did take this very rigorous, like science-based approach to assessing the health of their business, deciding who to hire, what metrics to track. So yeah, I mean, not that I'm plugging other people's books, but if you have to pick up another sales book, Sales Acceleration Formula by Mark Roberge is definitely worth your time.
Absolutely. I think it helped me tremendously when I was starting out as management. He actually came on the podcast as well. So
awesome.
Exciting. Cool. So when we spoke last week, we kind of talked about messaging and, first of all, the importance of messaging, but also how to better your messaging. So let's start with, what do you see as like, I mean, there's a lot of mistakes. What are the biggest problems people are doing now that are wrong with their messaging?
Yeah, well, I mean, so if we're talking here to B2B startup founders, right? And the problem, if you think about the spectrum of B2B people I'd say founders who start B2B businesses, there's a different kind of profile. There's the product-based founder, there's the marketing or sales-based founder, the kind of the engineering-based founder. And especially when you become kind of like, let's say, a marketing or you're a product-based founder, you tend to fall back on the product, right? And so when it comes to the simple question of people asking you, what do you do? Well, your product, like, what do you do? you get very enamored with what the product, oh, it's a platform that allows you to do A, B, and C, right? And so you start with the product. And again, like kind of no one cares about the product. And there's a lot of saturation in so many markets, right? Like there's so many different products that all kind of sound the same. They solve a little piece of the pie. So the one of the biggest problems is we tend to fall back on the product, right? And like, again, no one cares. The second problem that people fall back on is actually, this is a little bit less of a sin, but it's still not the best thing you could use. They fall back on the benefits, right? So they say, well, we built a product that can help you deploy this in like 10 times faster. Like we built a product that helps you save 10% of your bandwidth every week, right? And like those things are okay, but people aren't walking around thinking to themselves, like buyers, I wish I could save 10% of my time every week, or I wish I had a platform to do A, B, and C. So like those are the kind of the biggest sins. And so the idea is if you want to focus your messaging in a way that really deeply resonates with people, it has to kind of stir that emotional, response in the mind of your customer. And there's no better way to stir that emotional response than speaking about problems.
Exactly. And the problems that you solve.
That's right. Yeah, the problem or the enemy. Sometimes I refer it to. Yeah, like who's the enemy?
Sometimes they don't know what the problem is, though, or sometimes they don't even know that they have a problem. How do you approach that?
Well, look, that's even better, right? Because like think about, I love this example of infomercial products. You know what I'm talking about when I say infomercial products?
Of course.
So you're watching TV or whatever it is, and this product comes on that you didn't know you needed, that you started watching thinking, I don't need this thing. And then 30 seconds later, you're wondering, how did I not live without this thing, right?
With the spork.
With the spork. Well, because they do a good job of kind of highlighting the pain, the problem, and maybe the things you've been trying. Like, let's say, for example, you're sitting on the couch and you're saying to yourself, yeah, I could stand to get in better shape, lose a couple pounds. Like maybe I should do that. Whatever, right? And then all of a sudden they come on the air and they say, would you like to get in the best shape of your life? Would you like to lose a couple pounds, like be there for your family? And you're like, okay, yeah. It's like, well, most people we speak to have tried all sorts of diets and exercises and machines, and they just found like all of them, none of them ever work. And you're kind of like thinking, okay, hold on a second. Yes, that's me. None of them ever work, right? And they're like, wouldn't it be great if there was a solution? And they go on and now it's like this narrative that you get drawn into, right? And so I absolutely do believe that for most of us, we do have pains that are kind of, latent and kind of hidden in the back of our mind. And if there's a good seller or organization out there that can kind of come forward and put some form to that pain, right? Some words, some narratives to that pain, it can draw it out and get you to lean in and say, okay, tell me more about this, right? Like that's the mark of a good product pitch.
All right. So what's what is the framework for this? Without being an infomercial and without sounding super salesy.
No, well, look, the easiest thing, if I were to teach you like one thing, and this is the thing when I work with startups and tech accelerators here in Canada, oftentimes, I'm working with B2B founders, and the thing that I always tell them is I say, think about who the enemy is. Who's the enemy of your solution? Who's the enemy of your customer, right? So I'll give you like an example. My third startup was acquired by Salesforce. That's how I ended up working there. And the product itself, if you said, well, what did you do? Like, what did the product do? I would say, well, it's a platform for people to get more feedback, coaching, and recognition at work. And you might smile and you might say, that's nice, right? Like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we had more feedback, coaching, and recognition at work? And indeed, there were some forward-thinking executives and managers and leaders and HR people who said, yeah, like, I think that would be good. Our people they're asking for more feedback. But that wasn't the message that was going to enamor the mass market. So when we thought about, okay, who's the enemy? Who's the enemy here? It's not feedback. Feedback's not the enemy. It's not even lack of feedback. We asked companies, we said, well, what do you do today? Like, if you agree that feedback is good, what are you doing today to give your people feedback? And they said, well, we do this process. See, I told you I would say process. We do this process. It's called the annual performance review. And we said, well, okay, great. Like, how do people feel about the annual performance review? And they said, well, they hate it. They hate the annual. And we did research and we found that, yes, not even our research, third-party research, especially millennials use the word hate to describe performance reviews. And especially because, you go in your personal life, you have your Instagrams, your Facebooks, and your Twitters, and you got like everything is instant. And then you go to work and they're like, why am I getting feedback once a year? This is stupid. And so we found that this was the enemy. And so when you asked us at our company, what do you do at your company? I would say, what we realized is people love feedback, but they hate performance reviews, right? And now all of a sudden you're leaning in, you're saying, yes, I do love feedback, and my people are asking for feedback. We also hate performance. Okay, tell me, what is this thing? Right.
Yeah.
So my advice is you focus on the enemy. Performance reviews, like if you go to my website, it says, you ever wonder why you don't like talking to salespeople? Right. So I might say people love to buy things, but they hate talking to salespeople. Now, if you're a sales leader, you might have this little mini epiphany about the fact that customers don't like talking to your sales team. And now you're going to lean in. You're going to be like, okay, David, tell me more. Like, what is it that you do? And it doesn't really matter what I do, right? Like, that's the beauty of it. It doesn't matter that I have a platform that does this or a product that does that. The purpose of messaging, especially in a B2B founder perspective, is to get your ideal customer to lean in and say, tell me more about this thing.
I love that. And I love that you say that, because it's so true. You're not trying to sell them in your pitch or in the elevator pitch or the first couple statements. You're only trying to engage them. You're only trying to get them on the hook.
That's right. Well, look, most of us, especially in B2B, like, we don't have the benefit of having a solution that's truly mind-blowing. For example, if I said we have a platform that helps people like cure cancer, you'd be like, oh my gosh, like, that's crazy. What? Tell me about what, so yes, I am talking about the solution, but most of us, we optimize this, we prevent that. We have, I actually have this little narrative in one of the slides that I share in my presentations, and it's just about value propositions, and it lists 4 things. Like, we save, enhance, retain, grow, and then there's kind of like revenue, customers. Like, I can encapsulate everyone in B2B technology's kind of, value proposition in just a few words. And I show this to people in talks, and I say, does this, even in a kind of a heterogeneous group of 100 founders, I can say, does this capture what your value proposition is? And then everyone's like, yeah, so we all just kind of sound the same. I mean, if you want to stand out in the sea of sameness, you got to sound different.
The best in class service.
Yeah. Well, look, so there's 2 sins kind of, that we're talking about here. Not describing your product accurately in terms of the enemy, and then picking an enemy that's so overdone, right? So for example, if I said, people love great service, but they hate paying high fees. It's like, okay, like I don't even know what product that is, but everyone says that. So what you have to say has to be a little bit unique, a little bit differentiated, right? Like performance reviews. Not a lot of people back then were talking about performance reviews. Not a lot of people are talking about how much they hate talking to salespeople. Or there was a company I talk about in my book, based in Chicago, called Trunk Club. And without knowing what they did, which you can feel free to look up, what they went to market with was, they said, men love to dress well, but you know what they hate to do, Adam? Shop. What do you think? Shop. That's exactly it. Men love to dress well, but they hate to shop. Now, if you're a man and you love to dress well and you hate to shop, now you're leaning in, you're saying, what is this? Tell me more. Now, it happened to be a platform that did blah, 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 like no one cares, but you're leaning in. And if you are a man, here's the beauty also. If you're a man and you love to dress well and you love to shop, then this is not for you, right? And so a great side benefit of picking a great enemy and polarizing your audience is that you're going to attract the customers that are a good fit for you and repel the customers that are not a good fit. Both are great outcomes.
Yeah. I love that you do that and talk about that, because so many founders and so many even salespeople they're afraid to turn people down, and they're afraid to lose that 1% of business rather than gain the 90%. Well,
especially in sales, because we're incentivized to grow. And in fact, look, I talked to a startup the other day, and they said, look, we kind of have to show some revenue. Like, we're taking on these customers. They may not be the best customers, but if we want to raise money and get a good valuation, we need to show revenue, which I get. But one of the questions I often ask people is, they say, like, have you ever sold to a customer in your business that you knew you shouldn't have sold to? Right? Like, they just weren't the exact fit. You knew they were going to be a bit of a pain, right? You knew that they would start making requests of your product roadmap that didn't take you in the right direction. And everyone's like, yeah. And I said, okay, what would happen if you started to take on more and more of those customers? What would happen to your business? Right? And they go down this narrative and they realize, like, bad things would happen, right? Like, we would have all these CSAT issues, customer support would be, dragged in, implementation would be horrible, references would be bad. And worse, they would start. And if the customer is big enough, this is the other problem. If the customer is big enough, like the bad fit customer is big enough, they'll start making requests of our product roadmap and take us in kind of the completely wrong direction. So, take a minute, think about like who are the ideal customers you want to bring on. It's okay to kind of meander a little bit as you're trying to figure it out, but like ask yourself in all seriousness, is the benefit of taking on these bad fit customers worth all of the downsides? Oftentimes it will not be.
And people also don't understand is if you get your messaging right for the people you do want to target and you go after those other people, those specific people, even if somebody outside of that group comes in, that doesn't mean you have to turn them away if you need that initial traction. You can still talk to them, but you're still focusing on your ICP.
We used to have a thing where we used to do a couple things. If you're looking for some B2B hacks, when we were trying to decide if a feature should make it onto the product roadmap, what we would do is we would wait until we got that feature request like 10 times from 10 different customers, right? Because it's very easy for one or two customers to request something and sound very passionate about why they need that. But A, when you start hearing it again, B, we would put these little things in our application. So like we were a SaaS solution. And so we would put like little links to features like, oh, do you want the super duper reports? Like click here. And then when you would click there, it would take you to like a coming soon, landing page. And so we would just measure how often people would click those links. And we said, okay, people obviously want this thing. And then we would go from there.
That's good. And what about if people are just clicking it because there's a big red flashing button on that?
Well, there's that too. It's not like on the home page where it's like, click this big thing. But, if it's buried deep enough, it's not like the be all and the end all. Like if 10 people click that, you need to build it. But it's more like if you see that kind of link getting an inordinate amount of traction, now you can start doing some user interviews and trying to figure out, okay, what's the problem that thing solves? Because customers are also notoriously bad for designing features. In general, customers want what they have now. And so, it's not unusual, especially in the reporting example, if you're a B2B founder, to get requests from customers for product features that are just rooted in their current experience. So they say, oh, my current product has this report. Can you build that report in your solution? And you're like, okay. When in reality, like that's not something you should be doing, right? Like there's lots of reasons why that's
and they don't understand that report has bullshit numbers anyways, and is not actually helping your company.
It's true. Although, I have to say, slick reporting and analytics can sell solutions, right? Like if you can show someone what a day in their life will look like with your product or service and show them like a piece of insight or analytics. I'll tell you, I won't name names here, but I've been a VP of sales 4 times. In my last VP role, there was an analytics product that I used to use that would sit on top of Salesforce. It wasn't a Salesforce product that would give me certain insights and analytics that when I went into my board meetings, like my quarterly board meetings and so on, gave me insights that were fantastic. I couldn't get anywhere else. It was a super expensive product, and I was angry when I had to pay them every year the subscription fee. But I just said, for these 4 times a year, like, I mean, I used it more than that, but I'm like, I can't get these insights any other way as easily. And so don't underestimate for you B2B founders the value of some really slick analytics and converting customers.
Absolutely. All right, let's bounce back to the messaging. Sorry, I kind of took you off onto
no worries.
So what you said is really fantastic, but how do I build my own messaging? How can I?
Like, how do you go from like, okay, picking an enemy to the words that you're supposed to say? Yeah. So I'll give you like the simplest example, and I have tons of content on this in my book, but also my website and YouTube channel as well. Is I say, okay, pick an enemy, so figure out who that enemy is, and then use the words love and hate in a sentence. And you've already heard me do that a couple times here, right, on our podcast. Use the words love and hate in a sentence to describe what you do, right? So I already said, men love to dress well, they hate to shop. People love feedback, but they hate performance reviews. Or people love to buy things, but they hate talking to salespeople. So that's the step one, the easiest way to kind of operationalize that polarizing statement. Pick your enemy and try to figure out, like, use the words love and hate in a sentence to describe it. And do you want a bonus tip?
Of course.
Okay. Now the bonus tip is if you want to create a little bit more contrast, right? So I'm talking about people love this, they hate that. So I'm talking about kind of, two sides. Now, what I want to do is I actually want to show you how big that divide is, right? If I say, men love to dress well, they hate to shop, or I say people love feedback, they hate performance reviews, you might generally agree with that statement, but it doesn't really explicitly state how badly people hate performance reviews, right? Or how many people hate performance reviews. So we can use some data. We can add some data to that. So for example, I can say, people love feedback, but 80% of millennials use the word hate to describe performance reviews. Or I can say people love feedback, but companies actually report spending 15% of their time every year completing performance reviews that they hate, right? So I'm using a little bit of data there. So think about, if you're creating contrast for your solution, think about how you're using data to create a bigger divide, right? Like how much do people hate that problem or how much do people love that, right? And so data can be a great way of creating that contrast.
That's really good. And because then it really drives it to their pain point. It's kind of like rubbing salt in the wound. It's like, oh yeah, we are also spending 10, 15% of our time as well. That's a lot.
It's true. And people may not realize, how much time or energy or investment that they're spending. The other thing, though, I would caution people on is making sure that you're using data the right way, right? So like, for example, if I were to say, sometimes the example I use is I'll say, did you know that highly intelligent women tend to marry men of lesser intelligence than them? Right. Now I borrowed this from a book, but when I say that, you're like, now let's say I say that, right? And I could also,
can of worms.
it's a can of worms, but I could also say, the correlation of intelligence levels between spouses is, it's less than perfect, right? Like these two statements are mathematically equivalent. Like theoretically, if there's a thing called average intelligence, then anyone of greater than average intelligence is more statistically likely to marry someone of lesser intelligence than them. That's just math, right? Yeah. But when I say it the first way, all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's really interesting, right? So the way sometimes you can use data is very powerful. Even in, let's say, for example, you have a solution out there, and one of the benefits of your solution is that it saves your customers time. Right? You implement the solution, it automates something, and it saves a bunch of time. So the question is, well, how much time is it saving? Right? Yeah. If I told you that this solution can save 10% of your time every month, you might be like, okay. But if I said this solution can save you 25 hours a month, it can give you 25 hours back, right? Those two statements, for example, might be mathematically equivalent, but they're not processed. Yeah, I'm Canadian, so I'm saying processed again. They're not processed in the same way in your mind. Right? Yeah. 25 hours, you can picture what I would do with 25 hours. 10% of something is a little bit abstract, right? Now, I'm not saying that the absolute number is the thing that you should always go with, because sometimes the percentage is more compelling, but just thinking about what is the more compelling statistic in the mind of your customer, and then use that to help to create the contrast in your messaging.
I think that's the important step, is in the mind of your customer. Say it out loud and actually put yourself in their shoes to as best as you can. I mean, that's always easier said than done, but to understand what would be more impactful for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, these are things that you don't often think about. You think, okay, I'm going to pick the enemy, I'm going to create some contrast. Maybe if you're in that mindset, that's great. But yeah, we don't often think about how information is processed in the mind and how we make purchasing decisions. And that's actually what my book, Sell the Way You Buy, is about. There's an empathetic piece to it, which is, don't be a jerk and do things that would never work on you, right?
Yeah.
But then there's also like really understanding the pathways by which people make purchasing decisions, because it's not something that's clear to most people in a sales or founding role. And it's definitely not clear to you yourself in terms of how you make purchasing decisions. You think you're all logical, reasonable, and you're consistent how you figure it out. But you could not be further from the truth. Human beings are completely emotional and irrational about how we make decisions, but our brains trick us into thinking we're very logical. And so exploring those pathways will help you become a more effective seller and founder.
Yeah, that's great. So if I'm building this out, when is the right time to use this messaging in this format?
Early and often, man, anytime. And in fact, on your website, I often joke, if you looked up, like say a cohort of specialty technology companies, so you go on the Deloitte Fast 500 or whatever it is, just go to those companies' websites and see if you can figure out what that company does in 60 seconds or less. Okay. It's not so
That's
easy.
a lot of time.
It's a lot of time, but it's not so easy, right? You go on and what does it say? A platform for this and a this for that, and you're just okay. Like, I don't understand. What's the problem you're trying to solve? I don't get it, right?
Yeah.
And then there's feature lists and all these kinds of things. So use it early and often, especially when you're talking to like investors, right? Especially when you're talking about like copy on your website or even your marketing collateral, emails. I mean, I talk to lots of companies with very developed marketing organizations that are still sending out emails to their customers with subject lines like "What's new in 3.0," right? Like, come see what's new in 3.0. Newsflash: no one gives a crap about what's new in 3.0. Okay, they're sitting around thinking about
2.5.
2.5. They're thinking about like, well, I'm thinking about my problems. What can I do with this? How is this going to help me at the end of the day, right? And so use this kind of messaging, emotion-based messaging, early, often, 100% all the time. Now, of course, once a customer leans in and says, well, tell me more about the features and how you do it, right? How you do it becomes important after the customer understands like why you do it, right?
Yeah.
And what you do. So layer
Simon
approach.
Sinek.
Yeah, a little Simon. So look, I talk about that in my book too, like the golden circle, and like people buy, why you do it. So another tactic, not to get into more tactics, but if we're talking about messaging tactics for B2B founders, this is kind of like the 3rd degree tactic I talk about, which is what I call leading with what you believe. So rather than talking about features, people actually, there's in the Edelman Trust Barometer, they talk about how there's like a global study that they do every year in this big research report, how 2/3 of buyers are now what they refer to as belief driven. They basically make purchasing decisions based on a company's position on a societal issue, kind of big or small. So it comes down to like, what does your company stand for? What does your company believe, right? So for example, if I was trying to sell cerebral selling, like I could say a bunch of things. I could say, look, I believe there's a lot of bad salespeople out there, but I also believe bad salespeople are not bad people, right? I believe that bad salespeople are just good people who are using old, outdated tactics. And I also believe that if you want to be good and great and modern selling, you need to use tactics and approaches that are supported by science and rooted in empathy. Now, I've just said a whole bunch of I believe, we believe kinds of things. I didn't talk about what I do. You don't even know what I do. But now you're going to lean in and you're going to say, tell me more about this. What is this?
If you agree, if you have the same ideals.
If you agree, but that's the whole point, right? Like,
Yeah.
I believe that. And Sinek talks about this idea that, people are always on the lookout for other people that believe what they believe. And, it can be something as simple as, you're on the, he gives this example. Let's say you're in Paris, you're an American and you're in Paris and you're on the kind of the Paris subway, the Paris metro, and you hear some people speaking in an American accent, a few people away, and you say like, oh, like, where are you guys from? And then they say, oh, we're from New York. And you're like, oh, I'm from Los Angeles. And then you're best friends because you're in a strange place and you believe that those people have the same belief system generally as you because you're both American. So it's just very fascinating.
Yeah. All right. So you talked a lot about using it in messaging, the messaging in emails and and going to speak to VCs. What about sales itself? Like when I'm on a call with a prospect, how do I transition into this, and where do I draw the line of talking too much versus getting some of the information from them?
Well, I think, what you need to do is you need to hook them first and foremost. Like in terms of like the science of self-disclosure, if you want your customer to open up about their problems and challenges and how you might be able to help, well, they won't do that until they see you as someone who can help them, right? It's like if you went into a doctor's office and the doctor said, okay, tell me, Adam, what's wrong with your stomach? You would tell that person. But if you ran into them on the street, you'd be like, who are you? Like, why are you, there's no credibility there. So you have to establish credibility. So, there's lots of different ways you can hook them, simple things, especially as a founder, when you're talking to someone on the phone, like doing your research, knowing who they are, what their role is, even something personal but public they've shared. So kind of to build that rapport, but you can use this right away. Hey, look, at my company, one of the things we focus on, we love selling, right? But we know that people love to buy things, but they just hate talking to salespeople. And so one of the things that we're super passionate about and focused on is just helping modern sellers execute this amazing craft in a way that, number one, gets them sales, but also makes them not feel gross and makes their customers love them. That's what we do here, right? And now all of a sudden you're kind of leaning in and saying, okay, tell me more. And I say, okay, well, here's a question for you. Can you tell me a little bit more? I don't know if I'm a fit for you yet, but can you tell me a little bit more about your sales team and maybe some things you're focused on? Even to your point, maybe they don't realize that they have a problem. So you can say, hey, look, have you ever done like a funnel analysis? Have you ever looked at, at what points in your sales funnel your customers are dropping off? Because we typically work with people that have this problem, right? Or this kind of conversion rate. So you can start kind of seeding what I call priming the customer with your pain once you've established a bit of trust around your ability to help them solve that pain.
That's fantastic. It's, I'm trying to format this myself, and I think, I think the founders and everybody listening loves to learn new skills, but they hate to be unproductive. So with that said, I think it's time to say thank you, because this was incredible. There was so much here, but I think everybody wants to get back to work. So David, how can people find out more about you, your book, and what you're doing?
Yeah, so the website is cerebralselling, just all one word.com. And I give everything away for free. Oh, so you got it there on the screen. So yeah, I give everything away for free. Other than the book, which unfortunately you got to pay for wherever you buy books. But I have a website, YouTube channel, also called Cerebral Selling. But I put everything on the website. You can hit me up on LinkedIn, the information and I guess in the show notes here. And the book is called Sell the Way You Buy, which you can get on Amazon or in general, wherever you buy books.
Great. David, thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure, Adam. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Startup Sales with Adam Springer. Subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Contact Adam about speaking engagements or consulting services at adam@startupsales.io.